Hello, computer science students. Welcome back. We have another video today on classes. This video is going to focus on constructors. Constructors are a very important part of classes. They define what happens when you create an object from your class. So I'm going to get rid of this comment real quick so we can see a lot more of our code. And as we showed in our last video, I didn't actually create a constructor in the team class. That has not happened yet. But I was still able to create a team object. That's because by default, a default constructor is created for a class. It's so important that even if you forget it, Java says, no, you gotta have one. And so the default constructor takes no arguments and just initializes all of the fields or the member variables to some initial value. For strings it's null, for ints it's 0, for doubles it's 0.0, but basically it's default value. However, it's pretty rare that you really want a default constructor for your class, and so most of the time you need to create one on your own. So we're going to dive into that today. So one nice thing about constructors is that they always follow the same pattern. It's always going to be public and then the name of your class. So here we're making a class to represent teams, so it's going to be public team. And then that's it. In parentheses, you now have to give whatever input, whatever information you want for your class. And in this case, it's typically, the information you read in is typically going to be the values or the information that you want to store in your class. So we would typically want to read in a location, a name, and potentially games played or games won. Now, you don't necessarily always need to read in a value for everything. For example, in this case, if we're representing teams, when a team is first created, you don't need to tell us how many games you played or won. We're just going to assume it's 0, that you haven't played anything yet. So we're not going to allow games or wins as inputs. We just want to know what your location is and what your team name is. So we're going to go in to do this and do public team. Let's do a string loc for location, and a string mascot for your input value for your mascot. This is kind of your name, if you will. So now what's going to happen is when we create our team now, we can no longer create it with no arguments in parentheses. We're going to have an error over here. That's because when we construct a team, we have to match the constructor, the format for the constructor of our team. So our constructor now requires inputs in parentheses. Therefore, when we create our team, we have to provide inputs. We have to give it a name and a mascot, or a location and a mascot. So I'm actually going to comment out our code from step 1 here, where we use the default constructor. And now I want to show you kind of what happens to construct when we construct our object. So we're going to do team elon equals new team, and now we're going to have to, just to match the format of our constructor here, provide a string that will be the location and a string that will be the mascot. So when we pass in arguments, that has to be, that those two values, those two types have to match. So strings are in quotes, so we're going to do double quotes. We're going to give it a location of Elon and a mascot of Fightin' Christians, which is what Elon used to be before we became the Phoenix. We'll eventually change them to be the Phoenix, but right now we're kind of representing old school Elon before 1920 something. I can't remember the exact year, but it was the 1920s that Elon burned down, was rebuilt, and renamed the Phoenix. So our constructor used to be our default constructor, which had no arguments, no information passed in, no inputs in parentheses. Now when we create a team, we have to provide that because we have told our program, we have defined our class to have a constructor that requires 2 string inputs. So effectively what we've done here is assigned this string loc equal to Elon. If we combine these two windows together, the window on the left and the window on the right, and what we're doing between them, It's almost like this line is now saying string loc equals Elon, and string mascot equals fighting Christians. I just realized I spelled it wrong. So now that's basically what we've done, right? So the values we give in here get assigned when we initialize basically initialize our variables over in our class, in our team class. So the values we pass in as inputs in our tester get passed in and assigned to the variables that we create in our constructor. This is an important concept. It's going to happen over and over again when we work on methods. And the nice part is, the next time that we create a team, if we create a team Clemson, go with my alma mater, their location is Clemson and their mascot is the tiger. I guess it'd be tigers if I'm following the same format. Both of these are going to call the same constructor, but they're going to assign different values each time. So it's like we can run this constructor over and over again with different values as long as we keep making new teams. But this string loc and this string mascot are only usable in the constructor. Once we leave, so they're only, the scope is the word for it. Their scope, the place where they can be used and accessed and remember information, is only from this curly brace, this open curly brace, to the closed curly brace. And so if we want to be able to reference that information later, if we want to be able to get the team's location and the team's mascot elsewhere in our code, maybe we want something to be able to get the location or get the mascot from another method later. Well, the only way to do that is to save the information in the fields or the member variables. So we're kind of dealing with like three variables here. We have our inputs, which are going to get saved to our parameters. Basically, these are the definitions, the variable definitions for this one specific method. And now we need to save these in our fields or our member variables so that the whole class, other methods in the class, can have access. For example, I guess just to make it really clear what the problem is, let's go ahead and copy our print statement from earlier. As things are written right now, with my constructor doing nothing, we're going to pass in Elon and fighting Christians to these variables, and then they're going to disappear. And so when we call toString, the member variables that we print out have not been initialized, and so we're going to still get the same result that we got before. Location is null, name is null, game 0, win 0. So we want to be able to save this information, these inputs that are passed into our constructor, so that they can be used by all the other methods in our class. And that means we need to save them in these fields. So we're going to do team location equals loc. Remember, loc is storing Elon the first time through. So now we're passing that Elon in to our team location. We're going to take name equals mascot. So this member variable name is now reading in whatever was saved in mascot, which the first time through is fighting Christians. And then just to be really clear, we're also going to write games played equals 0 and games won equals 0. Now, this technically isn't necessary because these are the default values for integers, so they would be done this way anyways, but for clarity and for other people reading our code, we want to make it clear to them that we are intentionally setting games played and games won to 0. So it's generally good practice to make sure that, for clarity, it's good practice to make sure that your fields are all initialized in your constructor. To make it clear that this is the information stored in my class, and these are the initial values we're assigning to them. So now that we've written this, if we run our code again, now we're storing team location equals Elon, name equals fighting Christians, game equals 0, wins equals 0. So we've officially saved this information. And just the very last thing before we move on, I want to show you that this also works for Clemson, and that now our two teams are both storing unique information. Their own name, their own location, their own games, and their own wins. So this is how constructors work. There's kind of, like I said, there's three levels to it. You're passing inputs in to variables, and then you're saving those variables in the class's member variables or fields so that the class itself can remember the information and use it in other methods. So next time we will pop in and start talking about other methods.